G'day everyone, welcome to Drafted, the first episode of our dedicated SuperCoach Draft show for season 2025. We'll be dropping into the official SuperCoach podcast feed with our positional draft rankings in the preseason as well as some waiver wire content during the regular season. But to start with, let's start with the basics. If you've ever thought about getting into SuperCoach Draft but don't know where to start, this is it. We'll be going through all the basics of SuperCoach Draft to get you started and on your way. I'm Dossie. You may have heard me on shows such as The Phantom's Lair, The Draft Doctors, and Pod, the Point of Difference podcast. I've played one form of draft or another for every year over a decade. Have a few premierships under my belt, but recently I'm much more well known for my ability to be a runner-up, unfortunately, the last few years. Joining me, though, I have two favourites of the SuperCoach community. Both former members of the world-famous Jock Reynolds podcast, reuniting right here on Drafted. First off, a very familiar voice right here on this feed, Patch. And I'll let you introduce your special guest we've got as well.
G'day, it's a delight to be here and a delight to introduce the man who introduced me to drafting and drafts. It's Lekdog.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen. It's exciting to come out of retirement.
For the 16th time.
For the 16th time, yes.
The tattered copy of the Michael Jordan press release of I'm Back is getting a bit torn and tattered and covered in stains.
Yep, but I'll drop it next year as well when I retire later this year. It's going to be fantastic, and I'm excited to talk about SuperCoach Draft in an official format. It's bloody exciting.
It is exciting. Keen to talk draft this preseason. Yeah, we haven't really done a lot of draft content on the SuperCoach podcast feed in the past. We know that you yourself, Lekdog, though, have written plenty of great content over at Code Sports. Last year especially, you were covering the waiver wires each week. You did a lot of preseason stuff there. You've got plenty more to come on the written front this preseason. But why don't we just start with the very, very, very basics. What is SuperCoach Draft, Lekdog?
I mean, put it simply, it's SuperCoach, but each player can only be picked once by one team. So you can play with as many teams as you like. 12 to 18 is generally the range you want to work in. And yeah, you start with pick one, you take the best player, and it goes on from there. During the week, after you've picked your team, there's generally waiver wire pickups where you can put in a bid on a player to pick up who's available, who's a free agent. You put him into your team if you think he's going to be good that week, and then you hopefully beat your friends. Similarly to you, Dossie, I'm very much a runners-up sort of man when it comes to drafting. I'm very good at getting to a grand final. I'm very good at losing them to Patch in particular.
Hello. Hi there.
Well, then, Patch, you can talk about your love for draft and what is it that you enjoy about playing the different format. A lot of people maybe listening have just played the classic, but there is the format. You just switch it over on the app or on the website, wherever you go, and you just hit the draft button and you go over to that screen. What made you fall in love with draft when Lekdog introduced it to us, as you said?
I mean, there are two big things that I fell in love with. One was, in classic, if you're playing leagues, you get to the end of the season and so many people have the exact same team. Everyone's got very similar players. Everyone's got Bond. You've captained Bond. Everyone's got the same backline, the same forwards. Even this year, looking at Classic, a lot of mid-prices are just going to be the same in everyone's forward line. But in draft, none of that. You don't get the chance to do it. Once Jack Macrae's off the board, no one else is picking Jack Macrae. You don't have 18 teams in a league full of Jack Macrae's. So that's really nice that you get that point of difference because every player is a point of difference. So that's really nice to have different players and by extension let other guys shine who you might never consider picking. Some players, and yet they like an Alex Neil-Bullen is the perfect example where maybe this year people might look at him, but previous years no one's ever touched him in Classic, but he's been a draft nugget that you could just pick up and enjoy watching him, and it's been really nice. And then the other side of it is draft day itself. Is just so much fun to get around your friends, even getting around strangers. If you're doing it online, which I've done before as well, you just kind of drop into a draft, and pick, or you set it up and you have, a big barbecue with smoked meats and you hang out and talk some crap for a little while, and then you sit down and start picking all in person. And it's great fun to grab someone just before someone else is going to pick it. And, you pick Tom Green and everyone cries out, "No, I was going to pick him next," is a wonderful feeling. We won't talk about the feeling of when somebody else grabs the player you were going to pick next, but it's just good fun. It's just really nice. It's a different variation of the format. And then, I don't know, it's just, I just think it's neat, Dossie. I just think it's neat.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've always loved the format. I think I might have even played it before Classic. Like, my memory of draft just goes back that long. Yeah, just love playing it every year. Like you said, draft day's a great day on the calendar, especially if you do it in person. There is just that special thing about getting together with your mates. I mean, especially as you get a little older and it's harder to see people, it's really nice to catch up on that, that one day in the preseason. I suppose you mentioned it a little bit earlier, Lekdog, in terms of league settings. When people are sort of setting up this draft, because it is kind of how you want to start. You pop up to a screen, you've got to kind of make your league or join your league. You've got to have that commissioner that's running it. What do you suggest if people are jumping into their first draft? You mentioned a few different things about how many teams you want, etc. Like, let's hear, what do you think people should start with on those settings?
Well, if you're new to drafting, I guess the number one thing is you want active teams. So I ran a work league last year with people who'd never played SuperCoach before. We only had, I think, 6, maybe 8 teams in. And that was fun because they were all active. So you want to make sure however many teams you pick, you're actually going to have coaches who are participating and making weekly updates to their team. The other thing is, if you're starting out, you probably don't want to overcomplicate it and have, 40 guys on your team. You want to keep it simple. You want to probably have 4 or 5 defenders, 4 or 5 mids, a ruck, and 4 or 5 forwards, and then a couple of guys on the bench. Just keep it really simple. That way the draft doesn't take all day. You still have the same amount of fun. It means if you have a smaller amount of teams or a smaller amount of players required on your team, it means the waiver wire is going to be full of bargains and you're never going to get too stuck with, no offense, but your Thompson Dows and whatnot. You're going to have opportunity to pick up fun players. So keep it simple. Just however many teams as you think coaches will be active, and then, play with the settings, but less is often more when it comes to setting up your first couple of drafts.
Pat, you had a similar experience with draft. I know that recently, I reckon, the norm of how many players on field has drastically reduced. I think maybe in speaking to what you're saying, Lekdog, people just want to jump in, have a bit of fun, set the lineups pretty quickly. I feel like nowadays, sort of the average players on field, back when I was really playing quite a lot in the early days, it was like 5 defenders, 7 mids, 1 ruck, and 5 forwards. That's pretty much the standard 5-1-7-5 was the typical format. But I think nowadays it's sort of a bit shallower, but maybe a bit easier to manage.
Yeah, so... Oh, sorry. Jumped in over your patch. I think for me, like 22 players is that nice area, unless you're going to go full 50-player bloody dynasty rookie list leagues, which is a whole nother thing. But that 22 players for me as an experienced player is that real prime area. But I think if you're starting out, sort of 12 to 15 players are the other options you've got, and they're probably a simpler way to get into the draft format.
Absolutely. There is other formats of the game you just mentioned now. I don't know if, Patch, are you a keeper league aficionado yourself?
I did keeper leagues before I did regular drafts.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's hear your recap. So there is the single season draft is what we're mainly going to be talking about on this show. And single season draft, you draft a team at the start of the season. We'll talk about how that happens in a second, but you draft your team at the start of the season, much like if you've played an NFL draft or anything like that. NBA, it's the same deal. You have your players for that season, and then at the end of the season you redraft them again, and it's a completely different team. But with keeper leagues, it's a little bit different, Patch.
Yeah, it's for the people that want to play list manager just the whole way through, or people that are just insane, which we all are, in that you do your draft. As Lek mentioned, often you can have up to, I think Lek and I are in a league that had 48 players on each list at one point.
Wow.
Which is a bit absurd. And then from year to year, you keep all of those players, and you might delist 3 or 5 or 8, and then you go to the national draft, which is the pool of every player that's just been drafted in November, and then you pick from that, and it's simulating a real list. In that respect, you've got to make sure you've got young players coming through, and you can't load up on old guys who then all suddenly retire, and you have what Richmond had this year, where suddenly you've got nothing but young kids and are going to be at the bottom of the ladder for a couple of seasons. So it's a really interesting way to approach it, but it's also slightly complicated, or veering from slightly complicated to just excessively overbearing. So it's certainly not something I'd probably advise people jump into straight away. But yeah, it's certainly a different fun way of talking about it. And we'll often mention, like, from time to time, we'd be like, oh, this guy is on the waivers. If you're in a keeper league, definitely grab him. If you're not in a keeper league, maybe consider him. But we'll definitely try and keep it just to the single season format for now.
Yeah, it's a bit easy to talk about single season format, but I mean, in terms of a keeper, sometimes, not always, but sometimes similar players are available on your waiver wire that we might be talking about in season because, they've just had a ripping game in the VFL and they're coming up for some senior opportunities, and they're still players that we want in both formats. So, but yeah, keep that in mind. We will be talking single season on this podcast. Now, Lekdog, I'll throw to you for this next segment. So we've basically got I would separate the season into kind of 2 parts each season in single season. You've got your draft day and everything leading up to draft day, and then in season. So we'll talk about leading up to draft day first. What do we need to do leading up to draft day and heading into our draft to prepare the best we can?
Well, the best advice I can give you is to go through all the players and make your own rankings for each position. Takes a lot of work, but at least when you go to the draft, you'll have an informed opinion. Second best to that is going on Code Sports and taking my top 100 or the collective top ranking position articles and using them as a base. And then the main thing you want to know is injuries, who's coming back from surgery, who's missed a bit of the preseason, because that'll adjust their value. For instance, currently Nick Dacos is fine, but he's had an issue with his foot. Instead of going number 2 in a draft, he might slip to 10. Just got to be aware of who's available. Mateus Philippou, highly touted forward option. He's now going to miss a whole chunk of the season. If you're not across that, you draft him early, you're kind of stuffed the season. So just being across the news, positional changes, injuries, all the same stuff you really would for SuperCoach Classic, but you just want to keep an eye on the rankings and the general consensus. ADP is another thing that's available to look at there.
Yeah, those average draft positions, that's where people are drafting certain players in the preseason, and you can do those mock drafts on SuperCoach as well. So you can jump into draft. There's live drafts as far as I've seen on the mock draft. So you can go jump into a draft when people are keen. Obviously, you need enough people to jump in there. So might need to wait until closer to preseason when people are really getting into their drafts to jump in there. But go ahead and test it out and see where people are enjoying drafting players. Patch, I'll throw to you as well. What's your method of research in the preseason? I'm very similar to Lek. I definitely do my own ranks, and we're going to be talking about our rankings in weeks coming up as well. We'll go through each position, and then you can read further on those articles as mentioned by Lekdog on Code Sports. You can check the entire list, but we'll be discussing those. I make my own little spreadsheets. I love looking at the old data and sort of just ranking them up and down. I think I tend to be able to do those lists and adjust. I really like to use projected averages. So, you can use fancy maths or however you want to do it. I tend to just sort of bit of gut feel, bit of previous average, and sort of say, okay, what do I actually think this guy's going to average for the coming season? And then I like to sort of order my rankings like that leading up to the draft. But Patch, what's your method of whether it's rankings or just preparing for draft day?
I'm a big vibes guy. Just a huge vibes guy, which horrifies a lot of people. But, I'd obviously look a lot at SuperCoach Classic, so I've kind of got a pretty good handle on, who's going to be doing well and who's going to be doing well towards the pointy end of the top of the draft. And then for the lower down in the draft, I'll often go through and just look at names that I'm like, oh, I really like this guy, I really like this guy, and then make a list of guys who I think could be value and I don't want to forget about. And then I'll compare that to the guys who are kind of the highest ADP sometimes, where, if I don't have a big tier list in front of me, then I will look through and, as it comes up to my pick and there's the next 10 guys from the average draft position from the Supercoach website. And then I'll also have these list of names of someone like Kitty Coleman, who missed last year with injury, might not be as high up, or guys that I think might jump up who, other people are overlooking. So I'll often look through those ADPs and find who I like ahead of time, and then, occasionally look higher up and go, well, I don't like this guy this season because I think he'll be trash, or stuff like that. So there is an easier way of doing it, I think, than having a list of 150 names of the 150 best players and ranking all of them in order. I think there is a way around it where you don't have to do that because the ADP does a lot of that work for you. Does that make you a worse drafter? Possibly. But I've won flags while doing it somehow. So, I think it depends on how seriously you're taking the league, how much you really want to put into it, but also there's a case for vibes to be made, and I'm currently making it.
It is a fair call.
Sorry, Vossi. Vossi. Where? Vossi.
Gonna get arrested. Watch out.
My document I have open right now is called Player Rankings 2025 Vibes. So I'm very much in the vibe area for the initial rankings, but I think you do need to consider the other thing you want to consider heading into draft day is positional scarcity. So because it's you can't just cookie cut and copy everyone's team, positional scarcity will adjust how you value players. For instance,
so what is positional scarcity? So you've opened your big draft, you see a lot of midfielders at the top, but obviously you need to fill it with forwards. Can you talk us through what positional scarcity is? Why you might go draft a forward straight away?
Yeah, for sure. So positional scarcity is basically there's not many good forwards. There's not that many good ruckmen. There's lots of good mids. There's lots of good defenders. So you might select a lower scoring guy for the year, like a Jason Horne-Francis as a forward. He's not going to score as much as probably as a guy who's scoring 110 in the midfield, but you may take him because you want to lock in the best forward available. So you might jump earlier. So just for instance, I also categorize all my players into tiers. So in each position, so I've got midfield tiers 1 to 10 or 1 to 12, whatever it is, forwards 1 to 10, blah, blah, blah. In my top 50, I go all the way down to tier 8 for midfielders, but I only go down to tier 2 for forwards, meaning there is a hell of a lot more midfielders available at the top end of the draft than there is forwards. So what that does is it pushes a guy like Max Gawn or Jason Horne-Francis or Tristan Cherry or Dylan Moore a lot higher in the draft compared to their averages when compared to the midfielders being taken around those same spots.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like if you miss a forward and it's sort of those, after the first couple of rounds, you really just end up, your F1 could just be Josh Tracy or something. I mean, we were just looking at his ADP. I mean, he had a great season last year, Josh Tracy from Fremantle, but you'll be looking at a player even worse than that dropping down if you sort of miss out on those top tier players. So I like to include that in my ranking as well. Now, coming to draft day, guys, we've prepared ourselves for draft day. Unless there was anything else you guys want to touch on.
The only thing would be, you mentioned F1, which might not be familiar to people. Are you talking about he's going to drive the race car? Is that what Josh Tracy's doing? What's an F1, Dossie, for someone that hasn't looked at draft stuff before and will obviously use that term and, D1, M1 fairly interchangeably. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that would be my number one forward. So sitting at my top averaging forward. Yeah, it's a great point. We are starting from scratch here on this 101 podcast. So my F1 would be my top forward. My M1 would be my top mid. D1, top defender. R1. Generally, you only have, I'd say most, unless you're a crazy league, would have one ruck. I don't think you want to be going two. And then also,
not want to go, as someone who's done it before, don't do it.
There's only 12 good ruckmen, guys. Like, don't try and carry two through a league.
And what are we calling flex? Is it our FL1?
Just our X factor.
So you can actually, it's a new feature this year, and it is available for draft. We have had some people, ask on the socials if you can use flex in draft this year. So you absolutely can. It is a feature that you can use in draft. And I know, Lekdog, it's a hotly debated topic in your league at the moment, whether to use flex.
It is. And the reason, unless you've got a gentleman's agreement over how it's going to be used, for people just starting draft, I would encourage you probably not to use it, because essentially you're giving yourself another spot to take a ruckman. And if you're drafting at a certain point in the draft, you're able to take 2 really good ruckmen. It means that's a whole nother team that's essentially not going to get a ruckman later. They're not going to be able to make up the points difference. So for starter leagues, I'd encourage you probably not to do it. And for more experienced leagues, I'd probably still encourage you not to do it. Dossie, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds, but there are some other features that have been added this year. You can now control how many players are scoring during the bye rounds. So rather than in previous years, I've just skipped bye rounds, we can now reduce the amount of on-field scorers for bye rounds. So that'll be easy to navigate. And also the waiver wire order is now slightly different. We can talk about that in a slightly more advanced option. But it's good to see that there's some support for the SuperCoach Draft platform.
Absolutely. And just quickly, the flex position is that you can choose any position. I didn't mention that as well. If you haven't come across it, we've talked a lot about flex though on the other podcast, so hopefully you've seen that, but you can just pick any player from any position in that flex spot. So yeah, as Lek mentioned, you could have a couple of rucks, unless you do a gentleman's agreement in the league. No rucks in that flex position. Maybe that would work. All right, so we have come up to our draft day. Now this is the fun part. And maybe we can talk to if you guys have had any fun experiences on draft day. But what is the best way to go about draft day, Patch, in terms of you've got to, there's a few things that have to happen. You've got to set your draft order. Who's taking pick 1? Who's getting the last pick? Are you going to do a snake draft, which means when you get to the last pick, the person that had the last pick gets the first pick in the second round, and then you go on like that. So how do you go about draft day? And, it's probably good to have some of those things prepped beforehand.
I think the most important thing about draft day is the food. Unironically, I think it's the food. If you're going to have a big barbecue, like one of the guys that we're in a league with every year does, fantastic smoked meats. I'm not joking. Make a day of it. Bring something to drink along as well. If you're that way inclined, it makes it a much better day out and a better experience. So don't neglect you're there for the draft, you're there for the fantasy footy. Don't neglect the actual, the really good side of it, because that's really fun. But, on your day, I think you should always go with a snake draft. That way, it evens out. Otherwise, the person that has pick 1 in a 10-team league has pick 11 and pick 21, and they've just got an advantage. I think you need that snake draft to make sure that you don't have an advantage. In terms of how you decide who has pick 1 and how you have pick 10, you can, go wild. You can draw out of a hat. You can, I know leagues that will find a race somewhere around the country that has the same number of horses running as there are people in the league, and then assign everyone a horse, and then that's the pick you start with. You can do a foot race down the street. You can do anything and anything. The positions from last year can then decide where you go this year. You can have a bit of fun with it to decide how you go about it. And then, you all sit around, you all have laptops and the SuperCoach page open. But I also think it's very fun if you have a big sheet of paper up on the wall, or lots of different sheets of paper, where you can write your player's name down and stick him up so that everyone can see who you've just taken and stolen from them. It makes it a bit more interactive, a bit more physical, a bit more fun, is how how Lek and I often go about the draft day we have together each year.
How about you, Lek? Have you had any much fun on draft day? I know you mentioned before it's one of your favorite days. So how do you go about it, and what's your tips for a successful draft day?
Look, Patch has nailed it. It's do it in person if you can. Get as many people in the draft as you can in person, and then you can collectively bully anyone who's not there in person to make their picks faster. I agree. Good food, good drinks. I'm supportive of sticky notes on a big board or a big window to do your picks, and then entering it in through the SuperCoach app or website. Then you can do it off one computer rather than everyone having a computer. But it is Christmas. It is Christmas. So I would encourage you to have a prize for the previous year's draft. We've got a trophy that gets engraved in another league. We've got some rings we give out. Award those, make it a worthwhile event to come to, give away prizes, just it is, and because I mean, the people listening, I don't know what the demographics are. The people on this podcast are slowly getting older. So you do see your friends less and less. So it's a great excuse. Catch up. It's good.
Hey, I may be slow and old, but I'm not. Wait, what was the third thing you said?
Yeah, well, there's a few other fun ways to do draft. I know a good friend of mine from the Draft Doctors, Stevie Fizz, he always does the Royal Rumble, and each person picks a wrestler, and in the Royal Rumble, people get thrown out of the ring. So I don't know which way it goes. I'm not a wrestling fan, but as the wrestlers go down, you've got to pick. It's either when they come out, like what position they come into the ring, or when they get thrown out. So yeah, that's a fun way. I know some people do the same thing, but on whether that's on PlayStation or something, people just play different games. Like I often like if it's not like a physical challenge, because people obviously different levels of physical challenge as you get older. So as well, I think those are some great things to talk about for draft day. Now, what are some strategies in the actual draft itself? Just briefly, this season probably, is always different to the last. Sometimes you're looking to draft defenders early if there's, as you said, positional scarcity in the defensive range or the forward range. Lekdog, how are you approaching this draft in terms of just sort of who you want to draft in the early rounds positionally, and sort of where your gut feel is at the moment?
Yeah, so I think with the exception of, say, a Max Gawn and a Tristan Sherry, I think you're pretty much taking mids with your first pick. If you're at the back end of a first round, I'm talking like an 18-team first round, you might look to a Jason Horne-Francis or a Luke Ryan type or a Harry Sheasel. I think initially it's the mids that I'm targeting early. Because you want to you just want to maximize how many points your team is going to score. I know that sounds really obvious, and they're going to score the most in the ruck line and the midfield, and then the defense, and then the forward. So you generally, I either punt forwards or punt rucks when it comes to draft day. And punting means I'm basically just going to ignore them and take whatever left towards the end. My focus is going to be about building points on field, in defense, and in the midfield. This year's slightly different. I think we've got enough decent ruck options that you can take one in the middle of your draft. So, but as per usual, I will be punting forwards, and because I know that no one's going to pick Lincoln McCarthy, and I know that Lincoln McCarthy is going to be like a top 15 total points forward for the year. So you can punt forwards, trust me. If you get Jason Horne-Francis, that's very nice. If you get Bailey Smith or Jack McRae, that's also nice. But if you're not getting them, don't worry about it. Just get midfielders.
Yeah, it's sort of like you look at your team, and your team might be, very, very light on forwards if you are punting that position. But it's just the temptation. Just you can't, if you're punting, you've got to punt it. Like you can't just go, okay, oh no, I've got no one. I better take. I don't want to rag on Josh Tracy again because he's played well.
No, he could be the whipping boy.
Look, I don't want to take, Alex Neil-Bullen this early, because say he averages 84, you're picking him in those mid-rounds and you're like, okay, I really want a forward, I'm going to pick him. He should be a really good forward, but you might be able to pick someone that's going to average, 4 points less, and you're getting him several rounds later. And in making that position, you're going to get, instead in that spot, you'll get a midfielder that averages 105 instead of waiting and missing, and then they drop another 10 or 15. So you're probably sacrificing points in those that midfield position or those stronger scoring lines rather than a forward. But that is a bit more of an advanced, I suppose, draft discussion for what we're talking about today. Patch, do you have any sort of just general thoughts about this season, whether that's, who you're looking at drafting early, or just the way that the landscape is this season for SuperCoach Draft?
I'm kind of intrigued by the forward line this year, in that I think there is a lot of value there, but I think there's every chance that there's just a run that will just start on the forwards, and then it'll just be over, and then that's when you bail. And when I say a run, often it generally happens with the rucks, where everyone's been taking midfielders, everyone's very happy taking midfielders, and then somebody takes a ruck and Max Gawn's off the table, for example, and then everyone kind of looks around the room and just goes, oh, well, I guess we're doing rucks now. And then Cherry will go, and then Marshall will go, and then, like Brody Grundy will go, and suddenly everyone's going, oh, there are not many good rucks left. oh, we should all get a ruck now while like they're going hot, everyone dive in. And I think sticking to a plan and avoiding the peer pressure and the game theory of it is very important when you see people making a mad dash for the back line as defenders start going. And, you've got, say 4 defenders you're happy with. You go, oh, well, I'm just going to go off elsewhere. And while everyone is busy, having a riot in the back line, I'm just going to pick off a few forwards or pick off a few mids that are still sitting there. Don't be afraid to run against the crowd in a lot of those situations. That said, I'm as guilty as anyone of seeing rucks start going and panicking and then picking Riley O'Brien towards the end of a run and going, I'm deeply dissatisfied with this selection. What have I done to myself yet again? And then, you kind of got to play the meta game between the people you're drafting as well, which is why it's so fun to do it in person, in that it's easy to hurl abuse at people.
Yeah, and then there's those sneaky coaches that draft 2 rucks in the league and just bank on one and put them on the bench so that somebody else who is punting rucks later, can't get that sneaky position.
I was just going to say that, well, yes, that is a tactic you can do. But I think going into a draft, having an idea of whether you're going to go sort of upside breakout players or you're going to go the tried and true players, because while you disparaged Riley O'Brien there, Patch, you give you 90 points every single week, and that's actually really good in draft. I tend to fall into the favor of the tried and true guys where I'm like, I know what the floor is. I'm going to back in the veterans over the young guys, and that generally shows in my ranks. So just kind of having an idea of where you personally sit. I have to have seen it to believe it, rather than going early on, I don't know, who's a breakout contender this year that everyone's jumping on.
I just want to, we'll get some final thoughts at the end as well from you guys, but I think we've touched on all the sort of major basics of draft. We do recommend jump in there, make your team, and start organising early, because, you've still got plenty of time before round 1, the game starts. So I'd start organising yourselves nice and early. But I think one tip at the end here for a successful league, we've talked about a lot of tips in different areas of the game, but just one final tip heading into draft season. I'll start with mine because I think this is a really important one when you are beginning to think about draft, and that is to have an organised and very diehard keen commissioner. I think it's really important to have someone that's really the most passionate. So if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably the one putting your hand up. I think if you've listened to this, you need to be the commissioner. Get your mates organised, figure out the settings you want, and somebody needs to kind of take control. And that's the only way that really these things come to fruition. You have to have a commissioner that sets it up, that gets everyone the league codes, invites everyone, and gets it started. So that would be my suggestion. There is ways to do it if you don't have a core crew of friends that are super into SuperCoach. You can go onto forums, you can go to Twitter, you can go all over the internet to find mates that'll play SuperCoach. And I know some people that, in our SuperCoach community that have made, lifelong friends from these interactions online. So Lek, I'll pass over to you, but yeah, that was my tip. Have a super keen commish, and you'll have a great time in your league.
Have a group chat, whether it's WhatsApp or Facebook or a text thread. I found email threads don't work as well. That way, everyone's engaged. You can talk about the league. The worst thing that can happen in a draft league is after a few weeks, everyone just kind of dips off and gets sort of not interested. You've got a group chat. You can meme it up. You can communicate core information. And a little thing that I do in quite a few of my leagues, we do like a weekly wrap up where someone writes a sentence about each team or does a power ranking or whatever. And like it takes 5 minutes to do, but everyone waits all week just to see where they're going to sit in the power rankings or what the comment is about their team. So have fun with it, but have a group chat. Keep that engagement high.
Love it. Patch, your tip for a successful league.
Have fun. Like it sounds cheesy and silly and dumb, but like if you're not enjoying it, what are you doing? Like make it fun, as Lek just spoke about. Have that banter between people in the league. Make sure you're still in contact and talking about the league, here and there. Otherwise, it kind of withers on the vine and dies a little bit. So make sure it's not seen as a chore every week. Like go through, waiver wire and enjoy it. But yeah, I think it's between that and make sure you've got a good draft day, because that's the thing that will keep people coming back. Otherwise, it kind of gets very easy to get to February and go, we should organise that draft again. I guess, like, what do we do it? We'll just do it online. It's too hard. Try and make it fun, make it an event, because it is. I think it's the best way to play SuperCoach, because it's just, every team is different. You get that experience of going through and picking guys who you'd never look at in the fantasy format, and everyone just gets to have a good time. And why can't we just all have fun?
I think on that patch, one of the great things about draft is seeing those players that you're not used to. So everyone who played draft over the last 2 years isn't surprised James Peatling's a good football player. So for SuperCoach Classic, I guess everyone gets the same information, but you're sort of almost a step ahead because you're aware of who's scoring well, even though they're not a big name. So
you get to feel smug about it.
You do get to feel smug about it.
Yeah, you do tend to keep track of those state leagues a bit more, which is a big part of what we'll be talking about. In season, we'll keep track of some waiver wire picks. We'll talk more about trading as well in season a bit. Like, the big key as well, my final tip is a second one here, is like, you don't win the league at the draft. As much as we love our draft, we love doing our rankings, we love picking all those players on draft day, you're not going to win your full league on draft, generally speaking, because it's a long season. Patch does, but
I do.
Generally speaking, people get injured, things change, roles change. You might have missed a pick or two, you might have stuffed some up, somebody might have traded out. Like, things can change, and to be able to stay on top of that is what draft's all about as well. So whether you're wheeling and dealing, trading to get someone in to fix your team up, whether you're picking up a gem off the waiver wire, there is some of the names off the waiver wire in the last few years have just been incredible players that start not in the team or start just not being drafted, and all of a sudden a SuperCoach gun. So
Lawson Humphreys, waiver wire GOAT. Did we talk about what the waiver wire actually physically is?
Go ahead, Patch.
So basically, you finish your draft, everyone has the perfect team, the best team that's ever been assembled. No team will ever be better than that. Then a guy gets injured, and you're like, he's out for the season, he's done his knee. What do I do? And then you go to the pile of all the players that have been left over, and that's the waiver wire. And basically, you'll go in and you'll say, hello, I would like to pick up Lawson Humphreys, please. I'd like him in my team. And then, that'll put in a bid, and then everyone else can put in bids, and it kind of decides, based on ladder order, who will get the first picks. And then you all kind of, can pick off the steaming heap that is what's left of all the players, to find those little nuggets of gold. So there'll be plenty of players, especially the smaller your league is, the more players are left over and still in the pool that you can pick from. And rifling through there to pick up someone very good is a great feeling.
Yeah, and you can set your waiver settings as well to last. If people can't get a chance to check their teams until a little bit later in the week, you can set those waiver settings so that they last longer or shorter, depending on how much interest is in your league, or when people can check their phones if they're in different time zones or whatever that may be. So that's also a nice feature, because once the waiver period is over, you can just pick up players willy-nilly off the free agency pool, but those waivers are basically like you're bidding to pick up this player. So they're clearly going to be, if you're using one of those waivers, you'll then go shuffle from the top on the waiver pool to the bottom. So you got to make sure, I'm going to spend this waiver kind of wisely. So I know people that just tend to hold it out and hold that waiver until they find a really good pick, which is what I tend to do and hit the free agency pool. But anyway, great tip to finish off. We will be talking waiver wire in season, but next up, we're going to be talking our rankings. Thanks very much for joining us, Lekdog and Patch, on the first episode of Drafted. We will be back, I believe, next week for some rankings, our beginning of ranking season. So we'll see you then.